So you mentioned earlier as far as the rye. So what are the core products and how did you come across rye as sort of a foundational aspect of the identity of New Riff?
Yeah, great question. We were very lucky because when we opened our doors or planned to open our doors, we were in contact with a gentleman named Larry Ebersold. Larry Ebersold was for over 30 years the master distiller at what is now referred to as MGP. Before it was LDI, and before that was the Seagram's plant over in Lawrenceburg, Indiana.
Okay.
So Larry Ebersold, I can safely say, is one of the best master distillers for rye in the world, if not the best.
Wow.
He happened to have just retired.
Hmm.
He happened to live in Northern Kentucky,
Hmm.
and he happened to be friendly with Jay through Jay's contact with MGP and buying products for the Party Source. So it was one of these serendipitous moments. A lot of things about New Riff have been very serendipitous, and Larry was our consulting master distiller. So we were his first consulting project. And he came in and taught us really how to build the distillery, where to put the fermenters, where to run pipes and things. And probably the most important thing that he taught us was to fall in love with rye and not be afraid to work with it. So,
What convinced you about rye? Like what was his pitch? Where had you been before that?
Well, we hadn't distilled anything before that. So we had just been dreaming up some mash bills. Early on, before we started distilling our own product, we had bought about 300 and some odd barrels from MGP, or, it was LDI at the time, of High-Rye bourbon. You might have heard of a brand that was in existence for a couple of years called OKI.
Okay.
OKI stands for Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, and it was a brand that we cultivated based on, it was this MGP juice. So with the mash bill was 60% corn, 35% rye, and 5% malted barley. So slightly different variation from what you're drinking now or what you were drinking with your
slightly spicier too.
It was a little bit spicier, MGP, LDI, and Seagram's were big rye proponents because Larry had such a handle on producing rye. In fact, some of the world's most renowned rye brands actually started and were purchased juice from MGP. It's a large industrial plant. Some argue making some of the best rye based products in the country. So Larry really had a handle on rye. Rye is a very finicky grain. It's gummier than corn. Corn is much smoother. In the still and things. Rye is sticky. It gums up. When you're fermenting in a large scale fermenter, there's a big cap on top. If you think about rye bread, sometimes it's got more flavor. It's got more oomph. Corn is a little easier to work with. So, a lot of distillers are afraid of rye or they don't want to deal with it. There are a lot of distilleries, even in Kentucky, that make wheated bourbon that don't even mess with rye, to be honest, that like those flavor profiles better. But Larry really taught us to work with rye. He shared his passion for rye. We had purchased this juice already that was High-Rye, so it became something we became eager to work with. Wow. So that's it, a number of factors, but that's one of the main factors that went into our mash bill, our designing of our New Riff mash bill. We're a click down from that rye percentage. So like you said earlier, we're 30%. Rye.
Yeah. And so what constitutes a High-Rye? Which percentage what you're working with, the 30% is already pretty high, but where does it transition from sort of not High-Rye to High-Rye?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And Jay is my source for all of this information. There's nothing that's written that declares rye bill high or not. Generally, anything over about 18%, people start referring to as a higher rye mash bill.
You're way beyond that.
We are way beyond that. To our knowledge, to my knowledge, in the industry for bourbon, Four Roses and what's coming out of MGP at that 35% is the highest rye mash bill that we know of for bourbon. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we're just a click under. But yeah, anywhere between that 18 to 35%, one could get away with referring to it as a higher rye product.